Hi, I'm Femi OK, and you're in the stream. How would you describe a man in just 3 words? Today we discuss What's a Man, a woman-led podcast that asks men, what is it like to be a man? You can join the conversation by jumping into our live YouTube chat, and I will be sharing your thoughts throughout our discussion. March the 8th marks International Women's Day, and this year's Choose to Challenge theme asks us to call out inequality while building a more gender-equal world. Social science researcher Deepa Narayan believes that men changing their behaviour is key to achieving that. In her new podcast, she explores men's experiences at home, at school, at work, and focuses on how they see themselves, their power, their bodies, and sexuality. So, is rethinking masculinity the key to gender inequality in India? Joining us to talk about this, Deepa Narayan, host of What's a Man podcast, Harish Sudani, he is the co-founder of Men Against Violence and Abuse India, also known as MAVA, and Vishal Turaja. He's the co-founder of Dream a Dream, an organisation that works to empower young people to reach their full potential. Hello, everybody. I have to ask this. Deepa, you've been doing the research. What is a man?
What is a man?
Yeah.
I was surprised to find out how many men, despite the fact that they believe they're staunch allies and staunch believers in gender equality, still give very traditional or stereotypical definitions, limited definitions of a man, which includes being strong, being muscular, being powerful, being in charge, not being emotional, and if I was to summarize it, it would be not to be a woman.
Wow.
Not to be like
the
a woman.
opposite. Vishal, I
The
see.
opposite of a woman.
Yeah, Vishal, I see you nodding, and you were in Deepa's podcast. What did she tell you to persuade you to be in the podcast?
Doesn't take much to say yes to Deepa, but really for me it was the idea to explore my own story as a privileged man from an upper caste, upper class, heterosexual identity growing up in India, explore my own patriarchal upbringing and explore my own gendered upbringing.
What I was yes, Deepa, go ahead, please.
It was really I've followed Vishal's career for the last 8 to 10 years, and what really attracted me was convinced me that he was the right person for the episode on power is because I was exploring. We use the word power a lot, right? But what does it mean? And what does it mean to men and even boys, 7 and 8-year, 9-year-old boys? And I'd seen Vishal as CEO of his organization, Dream a Dream, shift very radically from going from a very masculine notion of power in terms of being in charge and leading from a head to someone who was shifting and aligning his leadership style to be more empowering, because his entire organization is about empowering children and youth, kids that we ignore completely and we think we know better than them. So that's why I thought he was the perfect person to feature a man who's very confident in himself. I don't think Vishal has any issues around his masculinity, but he had issues around his leadership. And so I thought that's what made it very interesting and powerful to feature Vishal and talk to him.
Vishal, and
even though I had no idea what he would say.
Yeah, well, that's that. Do you know what? That's what I loved, Harish, about this podcast, was that it was almost like the secret lives of men, that we were going in to men's lives and they were talking about their lives and their bodies and their sexuality, Harish. This is a big question to ask you, but as an Indian man, do Indian men even have that conversation? Is it unusual what Deepa did?
So, I would say that masculinity is in a crisis situation, and the sad part is that many men do not talk about these matters in general, or also even as a stakeholder. There is dearth of spaces where conversation related to the roots of gender-based violence, gender-based discrimination on women, which is toxic masculinity, and that is hardly discussed. So, I would say that such conversations are much needed. There's a woeful dearth happening. And since you asked about what it means to be a man in India, so I think one immediate thing is the moment a baby boy is born in India, the key thing which applies to him is entitlement to privilege and power. And there are three markers of what it means to be a man, if I can talk about it. Uh, so there are three markers which I always think that the traditional dominant masculinity which you find in India. One is related to performance. A man has to perform at various stages of life. He has to show that he's a provider, he's supposedly always a winner, always an achiever, and also a protector. So different roles he has to perform. The moment he's unable to perform, he's labeled as a bad man.
But what does that, Harish, but where does toxic masculinity fall into that? Because essentially none of that is bad.
I'll tell you. So what happens, the expectations of the society and the different arms of society, that a man has to be a winner, a provider, achiever. So what happens to men who are not able to provide? What happens to men who are unemployed for a longer time? What happens to them when they face rejection, failures, at various stages of life? So they are supposedly to be always a winner, and therefore in their own eyes, they perceive that they are failed as a man. So, you have example, I always talk about the farmer's suicide. Often the economic reason is cited as a reason for farmer suicide, but one of my own young mentee, who was a son of a farmer, said that the real reason is psychological. The real reason is not economic. That a man who is a farmer for 1 year, 2 years, he's not earning anything. So as a result, he feels that what sort of man I am. I'm not able to provide. I'm not able to take care of others in the family, including my children and elderly. So,
Right.
so what happens? The marker that puts unrealistic expectations on men. And therefore, the toxicity is seen in, as Deepa was telling, suppression of emotions.
Yes.
So when you're not able to achieve, you go into depression, you go into frustration, so you go into a shell.
And that's when you say it's becoming toxic. Deepa, there's something that you a beautiful example where you asked a little girl to talk about words. It's like, is that what a boy does, or is that what a girl does? And she goes on and on and on. You just ask her. I want people to hear this from the podcast, because it shows from a very young age how fixed, fixed your ideas are. Let's have a listen.
I'm going to read you a few words, and you tell me whether these are boy words or girl words. Strong.
Boy.
Powerful.
Girl.
Beautiful.
Girl.
Aggressive.
Boy.
Loving.
Girl.
Cries easily.
Girl.
Kind.
Girl.
Tough.
Boy.
Oh, Deepa, it starts so young. I hope in 20 years' time you can do that again, and then all of them will be go, 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 go. But right now, it's not the case.
I hope it's in 5 years.
What do you take away from that? It's really obvious. The little girl really just sums it up herself. But then what do we learn about men and boys from that?
It's just that the importance of social norms. She comes from a highly educated family. In fact, her mother is non-Indian. The father stays at home. But if the gender norms, if the norms of how boys behave and how girls behave, it's everywhere. It's not just in the family. You absorb it almost from the atmosphere, from the air. It's everywhere. So unless these subtle cues, as Harish was saying, it starts at birth. Unless these shift, we're not going to see big cultural change. I think the second thing I want to say is that all that we're talking about is, as maybe there's a difference in degree, but it's equally true in the US as it is in India. There's still a strong boy preference, especially amongst men in the US, than there is for girls. And when you do any drawing tests or any tests in the US about who's a leader, 80 to 85 to 90% draw men, including women. So it's really an outcome of patriarchy and the fact that our deep images about men, as again Harish was saying, men as providers, men as protectors, men as everything, despite education, has not changed, which is why I focus on the middle class rather than the poor, because we always look at the poor as the problem, not the middle class. But if we can change, we who have everything can change. We who already believe in gender equality, all the people you listen to in the podcast are all men who say we believe in gender equality, and I believe them that they believe in gender equality. So it's going below the surface and seeing what changes.
Let me just bring in Vishal. Harish, I know you're bursting, but let me just bring in Vishal first of all. Via YouTube, this is Shane Matthew. Shane says there are plenty of societies and subcultures that are essentially matriarchal, such as Kerala. Where does masculinity fit into this situation? And may I say, Vishal, let me just tell a little bit of your story, just a tiny bit, is that you changed your style of management to become more feminine. Deliberately so. So this is a good question for you. Go ahead.
Okay. So it's an interesting exploration. Like everything Harish and Deepa are saying, I'm relating back to my own story. Because I grew up in a very typical patriarchal home where, I could come home from school and sit in front of the television and, just watch television. Food came to me. My empty plate was taken away while my sisters had to go into the kitchen and help my mother. All the outside work I or my dad had to do because I had to be the protector. My sisters couldn't go out in the evening. So a lot of that internalized messaging started becoming my identity. And I took a lot of those identities from home, from my immediate environment, from school, into my workspace, into my leadership style, where it was always about that I have to show up as a leader. I have the vision and I have to take the team along. I am the one in the front and the team is behind me. And it's all the responsibilities of success and failure lie with me, so I cannot fail. And I used that in the way I built my team, I built my organization culture, and it didn't work. I ended up working like 60, 70 hours a week. I ended up creating a toxic culture in the organization where there was this external image of me as this inspiring social entrepreneur who sacrificed possibly successful corporate career to come up in social change. Yet inside the organization, people found it very difficult to work with me. I would be someone who send out emails to be actioned at 3 a.m. in the morning and expecting a response at 4 a.m. And it became terribly toxic. And it wasn't working for me. And that's what led to a burnout, but also an exploration of what is it in my identity of who I am and how I'm showing up that's impacting me and the larger culture in the organization. So then that led to a conscious exploration of what are the other qualities I have that could really be nurturing, that could come from a space of care, because I was great with kids. I was great with young people for the work that we were doing. I was an extremely good listener when I was with young people, but I wasn't the same as a leader. So I had to become more authentic to the work that I'm doing. I had to get out of the performance that Harish is talking about and move into a space of authenticity. And that's where I started exploring my feminine leadership style, or what we call today a facilitative leadership style, which is more around holding back, walking together rather than staying ahead of the game, more about listening deeply, more about creating safe spaces, more about creativity, having my own creative practices. I started exploring poetry as a creative practice, which I didn't know I could.
Vishal, are you more successful now that you're a feminine leader rather than a masculine leader?
I believe so. I believe so. I'm much more successful today. I mean, if I just look at the organization, 10 years back, we were working with about 3,000 kids a year. Today, we work with about 3 million kids across the country. So there's been a lot more unlocking of leadership potential in the organization, in the communities that we work in the way we are building narratives about young people in the 21st century. So it's shifted everything across the organization.
So I have a question both for you, Harish, and for you, Deepa. And this question comes from Saga Galani. And it's really about masculinity and that connection to violence. Deepa, you answer first, and Harish, you go second. Let's play the video.
So I think it's unfair to generically label the gender traits of an entire country. We are a billion people. We're an extremely diverse place. But like any other part of the world, gender traits that are conveyed in commercial media do perpetuate the idea that masculine, aggressive men are more attractive, desirable, successful. I think we've reached a point where many commercial actors will justify sexism and violence in films by saying that this is a commercial film, this is what viewers want, this is how my producers will earn money. How directly do you think stereotypes about gender roles in India contribute to gender-based violence in the country?
Oh, that's that age-old question. Deepa, you start.
First of all, the question, I agree completely that the stereotypes may vary within the country, but I do believe that a lot of what we heard the little girl say holds across, because I've asked this question over and over again, and again based on research done in the US, the patterns are very similar, divided into masculine and feminine. I think my thinking on what leads to gender violence has become more refined as a result of spending the last year and a half on this. I think the central reason for violence is actually twofold. One, as both Harish and Vishal have talked about, there's entitlement and there's power. And the second has to do with emotions. That in talking to psychologists and psychiatrists and talking to men, I'll talk about northern India, that anger, men expressing anger is tolerated and expected, but men expressing sadness is not. And so when emotions are repressed and you feel explosive, and you're the one who society has given you a sense of entitlement and power, and there are no consequences when you hit the first time, that's what I think leads to power, because till very recently it wasn't opposed. Because women were taught to be silent and be quiet. And so it's not just violence against women, it's violence against other men. If you look at violence, the overall ratios and the numbers in terms of violent crime, and it's also suicide. So violence against themselves, violence against women, violence against anyone seen as weak, because the laws are there, but the immediate consequences in everyday life enable men to continue doing that without consequences.
Harish, go ahead.
Yeah. So, the one point I wanted to tell earlier that, patriarchy is there in India and it is also there in the West and Europe. But what distinguishes patriarchy, how deeply entrenched it is in India, it's because of 4-5 factors, 4-5 subsystems of our society, which reinforces ideas about what it means to be a man. And these 4-5 subsystems include family as an institution, then education as an institution, religion as an important institution reinforcing ideas, and of course the next one is media. So, and if religion in Hinduism, for example, is 5,000 years old, so that means over these so many years and centuries, the ideas about what it means to be a man have been passed on from one generation to the other. So earlier I was talking about the three markers of what it means to be a man. And first one I said was about performance. So if a man is supposedly always a winner, achiever, the second marker is of risk taking, that he has to show that he is a real man, he takes risk and challenges. And the third marker is related to violence. So violence as an indicator of power, it comes when the first expectation, the first marker that you have to be an achiever, a winner, if you are not able to win, if you are not able to achieve, and you have failed in your own eyes as a man, then what is the resort you'll have to is violence. So violence on self or violence on the other gender. So I find that it's the bottling up of emotions,
Right.
pent up feelings, which including what Deepa was telling about feelings of sadness, pain, which are repressed and suppressed.
Okay, some questions
So how
here.
they will take up a form.
Yeah.
So the toxicity comes from them, that that the appearance, and most
It's almost like it's like
important point I
getting
wanted to
bad
tell
inside of you, right? It's like
Yeah.
inside, like you're running from the
Men
inside.
have to wear a mask. Men have
Yeah.
to wear a mask. They have to show that they are always powerful, and the vulnerable side is what they have to hide. And that takes a toll.
Let me share this with you. This is Nishant Thakur. Nishant, thank you for watching. How does the caste system factor into what we've been talking about? Is it a major element for gender discrimination in India? I'm going to give this to Vishal. Vishal, do you feel qualified to answer that? Of course. You're Indian. You're qualified. I'm making you qualified. Do you think that's a factor?
It does, absolutely. There are so many different layers of intersectionality at play here. There's gender, there's caste, there's religion. In our own work with young people, for example, we focus on developing life skills in young people, and we're talking about young people who are growing up in vulnerability and adversity, and many of them coming from castes that are considered lower down the order. Now, you build these capacities for them to show up with their identities, with their dreams, owning their story, with aspirations. And then they enter systems of job markets and, urban cities, urban environments, urban living environments. And then the system, the structural barriers and systemic inequities show up. Now, you have young women showing up at job interviews, and the first question they're dealt with is, one is, of course, gender, the second is caste. And the minute the interviewer, who's probably from an upper caste, realizes that this woman comes from a lower caste, the likelihood of getting a job goes down. And the same it is with the way you build relationships, the way the marriage market works. The biggest consideration for me when I moved into the social sector, and the biggest worry my parents had, was that there wouldn't be a woman or a family willing to marry their girl off to me. And that's how it starts playing out. Caste actually is at the intersection of caste, gender, and patriarchy. A lot of these complex issues start playing out.
I have to say, gentlemen and Deepa, that we could talk about this all day long. It's such a fascinating conversation, especially when men are comfortable talking about themselves, like taking off the mask, ripping off the mask. I love it. There's something that you do in the podcast, Deepa, and you ask for rapid fire questions, and you subject all the men to it. Deepa, stand by. Describe yourself in one question, Deepa. Go ahead. In one sentence.
Myself?
Yeah, in one sentence.
Curious,
Rapid fire.
Curious, passionate, compassionate.
One thing you like about yourself.
I can renew my passion.
One thing you dislike about yourself.
I'm continually renewing my passion.
Did you tell your mum about your first kiss or your first crush?
No, because it was too late.
Ooh, okay, now we're getting spicy and now it's the end. Have a look here on my laptop. What's a Man? Masculinity in India is the podcast. Do take a look at that. And of course, Dream a Dream. This is Harish's project, and it's Vishal's project, and Maiva is Harish's project. All worthy of you to dig deep into. Thanks for watching the stream today. See you online next time.